Hello, my name is Martin and I'm part of the leadership team here at King's Church, and we are in the middle of a sermon series about building altars. We believe God has spoken to us about building altars in our lives. I'll just say that again. We believe God has spoken to us about building altars in our lives. There were two clear prophetic words that came to us. One from inside the church and one from outside the church, saying, I want my people to be building altars and worshipping and spending time with me. That's what we're responding to. And that's why it's so important. Now, what does it mean to build an altar? Well, of course, if you're a disciple of Jesus Christ, you're living in his presence at every moment of every day. But building an altar means that there are times when it's not just the everyday moments, but you actually devote time every day, which is 100% for God and for no one else. 100% for worship, for prayer, for listening to him. That's what building an altar is all about. The government, in their advice to us on coronavirus, keep on with the three things: hands, face and space. Those three things. For me, for building an altar, there are three things: time, place and guarding. Time. I need to have a time, set time for me every day when I do my time with God, altar building. Secondly, place. It helps me so much if there is somewhere that I go to in order to do this. And three, guarding it. I need to guard it because there are distractions that will come in to rob me of this time. And the number one distraction is my mobile phone. So I need to watch that and keep that away. Practically, that means I need to get up in the morning. It means I need to go to the table where I do this, and I need to get my Bible there, notebook, my worship music or whatever else I'm going to be using in order to meet with God. And I need to guard it against any distractions. This, of course, is not revolutionary. This is right the way through the Bible. All this building an altar is not an unusual thing. Right through the Bible and church history, people are doing this. This is what God is calling his people to do. So when we're doing this, we're right in the heart of what God has been doing right through history. And of course, we're following Jesus' amazing example in Mark chapter 1, where he got up early in the morning. He left the place where he was sitting. He went to a solitary place, and there he prayed. He did the time, the place and the guarding. So the particular part of the Bible that we're looking at in order to study it to help us with this altar building is the Book of Ezra. Now, Ezra is not just instructions, but it is part of a story. We need to know what is the story in Ezra, and you probably have heard some of it already. But the story so far, well, it starts 70 years before the Book of Ezra starts. 70 years earlier than the Book of Ezra starts, the people of God were taken into captivity. What does that mean? That means that the people of God, God's own people, an enemy invaded their land. Their land was destroyed, their houses were destroyed, the city of Jerusalem was completely torn down, the temple was ruined, the altars were taken away, there was nothing left, and then many of the people were killed, and the people who weren't killed were dragged away into captivity, hundreds and hundreds of miles away from home. There was no chance that they would ever get back. And then at the beginning of the book of Ezra, there is a command from the emperor to the people of God to go back. A command saying to them, go back, make a place of worship for God. Make an altar for God. And that is what the book of Ezra is all about, how that happened and what happened. Now, I've been trying to imagine, what must this have been like for the people? What must this have been like? And imagine it was in Heathfield. You know, at the end of 2020, an enemy comes into our country, it destroys our towns, destroys our homes, it takes us away from where we're living, and we're taken hundreds of miles away to a foreign country. And at that point, it becomes impossible for us to ever get back home again. But we have to be in this captivity for 70 years, but in 70 years' time, we get to go back. Well, that sounds quite hopeful. That sounds quite encouraging until you think, hang on a minute, Martin, I am 50. I'm in my 50s rather. I'm older than 50. I'm in my 50s. That means that by the time I get to come back, I'm going to be in my 120s. Actually, I'm going to be dead. It means I'm never coming back. My children are in their 20s and 30s. That means they'll be in their 90s. It probably means they're not coming back. My grandson, well, he's 1 year old now. It means the only chance that he will have of coming back is when he's an old man in his 70s. So it might well be his children, or more likely his grandchildren are the ones who get to come back. Going into captivity for 70 years means it's your great-great-grandchildren who are the ones who will probably return in any meaningful way. Now, where have we got to in this story? Where we've got to is Ezra chapter 2. And in Ezra chapter 2, the people are coming back. Remember, these are the great-great-grandchildren of the people who had originally got taken into captivity. And when we get to Ezra chapter 2, we get one of those things that happen in the Bible. You've just got the story going, you're just getting into the story, and then you suddenly find this chapter, a huge long chapter that's full of names. And Ezra chapter 2 is a long chapter full of names. The name after name after name, and there are 70 verses on it. You might think, well, what have we got to learn from 70 verses of names? Well, actually, as I was going through it, I thought this is really, really quite instructive. I found that quite, firstly, interesting, and secondly, quite astonishing what was going on. So I want to share some of that surprise with you. Now, I'm not going to read all 70 verses of it. It's not going to come up on the screen, but I am going to start just by reading at the beginning of this. It says, now these are the people of the province who came up from the captivity of the exiles. And then in verse 2, the list of the men of the people of Israel, the descendants of Parosh, 2,172, of Shephatiah, 372, of Ara, 775, and so on. This keeps going. Now, I'm just trying to imagine the scene. I'm imagining an official in Jerusalem, and he's got his desk there, and the people are coming back. And the first group that comes back is this family group. And he says to them, so who are you? And they say, we're the descendants of Parosh. And how many of you are there? Well, there are 2,172 of us. Welcome. We're really glad you've made it back. Come and get settled in, descendants of Parosh. So who are you? And the next group come up. We're the descendants of Shephatiah. Oh, right. How many of you are there? Well, there are 372. And then it carries on like this. And there are verses and verses of all these names. Now, this is not particularly surprising because if you get taken into captivity, you're probably going to want to stick as far as you possibly can in your family group. Where it gets surprising is when you get to verse 21. It says, the men of Bethlehem, 123. Now you imagine the man at his desk and up comes this group of people and he says, so who are you? And they say, we're the guys from Bethlehem. You're the guys from Bethlehem? Have you ever been to Bethlehem? No, we've never been to Bethlehem, but our great-great-grandfather, he came from Bethlehem, so we are the men of Bethlehem. Ah, right, welcome, great to have you. Right, who are you? Well, we're the guys from Netopha. Ah, right, so how many of you are there? Well, there are 56 of us, and our great-great-grandfather, he came from Netopha, so we're the guys from Netopha. And this carries on like this. So it wasn't just that they remembered who they were, their identity, which family they were in, but they knew where they were from as well. But then it gets even more astonishing when you get to verse 36 for me. It says, the priests, the descendants of Jedaiah, 973. That means the guy was sitting at his desk and up came this group of people and they said, who are you? And they said, we are the priests. So you're the priests? But there's no temple, but there's no altar. There's no sacrifices, there's no church services going on, and you're the priests? Yes, we're the priests. What does that mean? That means that there was a man, a priest, who went into captivity called Jedaiah, and this priest said, I am a priest of the living God. And he told his son, you are a priest of the living God. And he told his son, you are the priest of the living God. And he told his son, you are a priest of the living God. And he told his son, you are a priest of the living God. And that was the guy that got to get home and actually became a functioning, actually serving priest of the living God. Not only did they know who they were, not only did they know where they were from, but they knew what God had called them to do. Being in captivity does not mean we have to lose our identity. Being in captivity does not mean we have to lose where we're from, and it does not mean that we have to lose what the calling of God is on our life. It's not just the priests. When you read through it, the next group that come back are the Levites. They're the servants who make the worship moments functioning happen. And then there are the musicians, the worship leaders. They have retained their identity right through this process, and the temple servants and the gatekeepers and so on. All of these guys, they had their calling from God, they had their identity from God, and they had not lost it, they had kept it. Now, we are not in captivity. We're not in this sense of being far away from our land. Well, we are in a difficult time though. We're not in 70 years of captivity, though we are in a few months, possibly a year or more, of nothing being able to function as we know it. But that does not mean that therefore we lose who we are, our identity, or we lose what our calling is. Now, what is our calling? Our calling for every believer in the Lord Jesus Christ, our calling is as priests. 1 Peter chapter 1 verse 9, chapter 2 verse 9, really famous verse says, you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. You are a priest of the living God, if you are a follower of Jesus Christ. Priests are not guys who stand at the front. Priests are not a special class apart. Priests, in the New Testament terms, are everyone who is a believer in Jesus. And the calling on you as a priest is to be worshipping, is to be serving at an altar. You are called to do that. And even when church isn't functioning in the way we normally think of it as functioning, you have not lost your identity or your calling. You are still called to function as a priest. You might be somebody at school, or you might be a nurse, or you might be a teacher, or you might be a builder, you might be an office worker, you might be a retired person, but all of that is secondary to what your primary calling in life is. You are called as a priest, someone to serve at an altar. That is the biggest calling on your life. The Lord Jesus Christ, the King of Kings, has saved you and made you one of his priests. Are you functioning as a priest? Are you functioning at the altar? Are you functioning in your calling, or have you let it slip? Don't let it slip, and particularly as the Lord has spoken to us about building the altars, we need to be those who hear that and actually function in our calling, whatever the challenges that we're facing at the moment. Now, I want to finish just with an interesting bit that happens at the end of this chapter. There is a group of people who turn up and they have some problems. I'm going to read it just about one of those men, and this man had the interesting name of Barzillai. And Barzillai, I'm going to read verse 61 just as if it was just relevant to him, even though actually relevant to more than him. And it says, from among the priests, the descendants of Barzillai, a man who had married a daughter of Barzillai the Gileadite, and he was called by that name. He searched for his family record, but he could not find it, so he was excluded from the priesthood as unclean. What is going on in those verses? Well, the commentators have spent time thinking through it, trying to tease out what is going on, and this is what they seem to have come up with. And this is it. 500 years before Ezra, there was a man called Barzillai the Gileadite who was a very wealthy man, and there was a priest who decided, I am going to cash in being a priest in order to marry into this wealthy family. He had a calling from God to serve at an altar, but he chose instead to serve money. And as a result, he messed things up for his descendants. I mean, this happened 500 years ago. He cashed in being a priest in order to marry into a wealthy family. And 500 years later, one of his descendants who wants to function as a priest is not able to, because there is a huge question mark about what had happened 500 years before. This is so important for us who live in an instant generation. We want everything now. They've done studies on websites. If you click on a website and it takes more than 1 or 2 seconds to appear, then we're starting to feel frustrated. Most people abandon a website if it takes longer than 3 seconds to load. We think that everything we do is just for right now and it has no consequence in the future. Am I happy now? Did it tick my box now? If it didn't, I'll just give it up and go and do something else. God says build an altar in your life. I'll try it today, maybe try it tomorrow. If it doesn't float my boat straight away, if it doesn't tick the instant gratification box, I'll try it, give up and try something else. I don't think that my responding in obedience to God now will have an impact not only on me, not only on my future, but on these verses say, on generations of my family life to come. I am more worried about the next 5 seconds than I am about the next 500 years. Why should I set an altar in place in my life and worship God there every day? I will set an altar in place in my life because it will change me, because it will change my future, because it's obedience to God, and because I have a family, it will impact my family for generations to come. I, Martin Clay, say that the Clay family will never be the same for generations to come because I am choosing to build an altar every day in 2020. I would encourage you to hear what this is saying. Don't allow this experience of captivity to rob you of what God is commanding you to do now. Choose to build an altar every day and see this town, this area, your life and your future lives of your future generations transformed by the grace of God. God bless you all.